So I'm Dr. Jennifer Van Oss, and I'm an assistant professor and extension specialist in animal welfare here in the Department of Animal and Dairy Sciences. So my role is both applied research and extension, which means that I don't have a course that I'm in charge of for undergraduate teaching, although I do guest lecturing in the department. And instead I do my teaching and learning in the field. So I work with dairy farmers and all of their supporters, such as other extension educators, veterinarians, nutritionists, consultants, and so forth, to help them implement best practices for animal welfare on their farms. So I just wanted to point out here, we have this motto in my lab. It says, giving cows a voice through science. And so in a moment, I'll explain how we do that. So in my lab, we do applied research to gain new insights about animal behavior, to inform our understanding of animal welfare. And then we take those findings and translate our new knowledge to the field so that we make sure that this information gets into the hands of dairy farmers and others in the industry so that we can improve the lives of animals on farms. So I want to explain why I use the word animal welfare, because I think in the US we more commonly hear the term animal well-being. And the reason for that is our global scientific community has called it animal welfare. And that word sometimes has a confusing connotation. But if you think about the root of the word, we're just asking, how well is this animal faring, whether it's a cow or a calf? Is she experiencing good welfare, poor welfare, or some kind of state in between? And of course, we want to push things towards the good end. So to understand animal welfare, what we are considering is what we as humans do to provide care to our animals. So that care can consist of their housing environments, the management practices that we use, husbandry practices, and also how we directly interact with and handle those animals. So all of those actions are animal care, which is what we as people do, and then the outcome is animal welfare. So that includes the animal's health and biological status and things like growth, production, and reproduction. But especially in our lab, we think it's really key to understand the animal's behavior, because that can tell us about her experience and her quality of life. So I think it's really important to note that science has shown that farm animals, including cattle, can experience feelings and emotions. And that doesn't mean that they experience the same complex, nuanced human emotions that we do, like jealousy, but we know that they can experience negative feelings like pain and fear, which we want to minimize. And on the flip side, we want to promote positive emotions like contentment and enjoyment and make sure that they have a life that's worth living. So I want to talk about how we give cows a voice through science. So we can use clever, validated techniques to ask animals what's important to them, so that we aren't just projecting what we as people think is important for them to have a good quality of life. So for example, we can observe their behavior, measure their physiology, measure their production, and it can give us insights into what they think is important. And so one technique we use is called preference testing, where we offer the animals certain set of choices based on our hypotheses, and we see what they choose more or what they spend more time with, and we call this letting them vote with their feet. So it gives them a voice to say, this is what I prefer. There's also a technique called motivation testing, and this actually draws concepts from consumer demand and economics. And the idea is that you put some kind of obstacle in the animal's way, whether it's literally an obstacle course, or asking them to push heavier and heavier weights, or push a lever an increasing number of times. And the harder they work indicates that something's more important to them. And we can combine these pieces of evidence to infer what matters to the animal, and therefore how we can improve their environments to make sure they have a good quality of life. So in my lab, we have a lot of different research directions. And as I mentioned, when I go out into the field and work with the dairy industry, it's not just about me teaching and transferring knowledge, but also about listening and understanding what farmers and their supporters observe happening to the animals on their farms and what kind of challenges they think they're facing so that we can provide science-based solutions. So one of the areas that I work on based on listening to these conversations with people in Wisconsin is what we call pair or group housing of calves. So there are really important historical reasons why the US dairy industry typically houses young calves in individual housing. But this is starting to shift, and this is based on research that's happened in the last few years. And in my lab now, we're also exploring this area to help farmers implement pair housing successfully. So One of the challenges that producers have observed is abnormal oral behaviors where calves will suck on each other, and this is called cross-sucking. And it's just an abnormal manifestation of a normal behavior, which is that young calves suckle to drink their milk, but sometimes they can redirect this inappropriately. So we did research on feeding strategies for milk and for starter grain to help calves have an appropriate outlet for that behavior. So that research was done by my former master's student, Rakia Salter, and it was published in Journal of Dairy Science. And we wanted to provide practical, low-cost, low-barrier solutions to help producers reduce this abnormal behavior and be able to pair house with more success. And that is what I call an integrated project, where we do the research, but we make sure that it's really applicable to the industry. So what I've also done is worked with other collaborators here at UW-Madison and at other universities, and we developed this series of 7 fact sheets, which we call 2 Heads Are Better Than One, a starter guide to pair housing of calves, where we incorporate those types of research findings as well as practical observations in the field to help producers who are interested in transitioning to pair housing have a one-stop shop with this repository of information. So that's the research side and the extension side. We also do research on how to make sure the environment is comfortable for cows and calves. So one really important basic behavior for cattle is resting. They need to spend about half their day or more lying down. And this can be challenging sometimes depending on the environmental conditions. For example, in many regions of the US, including Wisconsin, it gets hot enough in the summer to cause what's called heat stress. And this reduces milk production, it causes cows to eat less, and it causes them to lie down less. So they stand up to try to dissipate heat. And despite lots of research on how we can cool cows to restore milk production and feed intake, there hadn't been any evidence at all about how we can improve lying times. So we obtained a grant from the United States Department of Agriculture, and we tested high-speed air from fans. And it seems like common sense, but the key was that nobody had actually measured the air speeds at the cow's lying heights and related that to lying time. So we did an experiment, and the results are really striking, and we found that properly directed fans with high-speed air can indeed improve lying times in summer. So we're really excited about those results, and this summer we're going to hold workshops on dairy farms in the region to teach people in the industry how to measure lying times so they can troubleshoot their fans and ventilation systems and improve animal welfare on farm. And then just one more example of the research we do to improve the environments of cattle is not just to make it more comfortable, but also to provide opportunities to express important behaviors. So I mentioned earlier that sometimes calves can have abnormal oral behaviors, and this can happen at various ages, and we think it has to do with how cattle evolved to eat. So very young calves will suckle to drink their milk, and as they develop and they start to eat more solids, in the wild, cattle would be grazing, and if we look at the mechanism of how they eat, they would use their tongues to grab vegetation. And so in conventional farming environments, this can sometimes result in abnormal behaviors. And so again, we want to provide appropriate outlets for them so that they don't have abnormal behaviors and instead have chances for positive welfare. So an intriguing thing we discovered is that for young cattle, we can provide them with simple brushes, and these can be broom heads or deck scrub brushes from the hardware store. And it allows them to do this oral exploratory behavior and also to groom themselves, which is another important natural behavior. So it's something that they enjoy. It's a potentially low-cost solution. There's also fancy mechanical rotating brushes that are offered for dairy cows, but we wanted to explore alternatives that might be more affordable. And one of the things that we observed is that young cattle use these brushes for both grooming and for oral exploration. And if they've never been exposed to brushes before, they start using them right away, just within a few minutes or even a few seconds, and they keep using them over time, which tells us it's something that's important for them to use on a daily basis. So these are just some examples of the research that I do. But beyond what I do in my lab, there's research going on all over the US and all over the world. And what I think is really important is to take this knowledge and make sure that policies and expectations for animal care on farms incorporate the scientific knowledge. So there's a program called FARM, F-A-R-M, which stands for Farmers Assuring Responsible Management. And it's through the National Milk Producers Federation. And it's evolved over time, but now about 99% of farms in the United States participate. And so there's a set of expectations that all the farms are aware of, and then an evaluator comes to each farm at least once every 3 years to see if the farm is following these recommendations. And so it's a way of making sure that that science, again, is translated into these expectations on farm. So scientists like me are involved in setting these recommendations along with veterinarians and dairy farmers themselves. And this program is constantly evolving as we learn more. And I think that that's really exciting because it's a way to take that science, improve the lives of animals on farms, and also hopefully promote consumer confidence in the way that we care for our animals. So overall, my goal with my research and extension is to give animals a life worth living and make sure that we use science to give animals the best life possible on dairy farms, and then hopefully use this knowledge to help dairy farmers succeed and gain consumer confidence and stay sustainable in the long run. So when we're collecting data on animals, because in my lab we're very interested in animal behavior, it means we do a lot of observation by watching the animals either in real time or video recording, which allows us to go back and look at really detailed behaviors. So we do have a wet lab, but that's not really where most of the magic happens. We of course will process some samples there, but for behavior right now it relies a lot on human observation, and that's where we have a lot of undergraduates involved in research in our lab, which I think is great because I did research as an undergrad, and that ultimately informed my own career path, even though I had some different deviations along the route to getting here. And so that means that we mainly do our work in a computer lab as well as on the farm. And so I don't have any exciting lab equipment to show, but we'll have dual screen monitors and hard drives where our students are helping us watch these behaviors. The next frontier is automated behavioral collection. And we have other colleagues in our department who work on what's called precision livestock, which is about automating data collection, including collecting animal behavior using computer vision or machine learning instead of the old-fashioned way. But right now, human observation is still the gold standard, and we have very high standards for repeatability and consistency between people. And it's also fun to watch calves and cows interacting.